There we go. Back to the share. Okay. So he gave him a system, which we would call it a basic management system. Question is why Moses didn't think of it himself, but that's not today's topic. And that's how the Torah portion opens up. Then it moves to the children of Israel coming to Mount Sinai. They camp at Mount Sinai. They come to the Sinai desert, where they are told that God has chosen them to be His kingdom of priests and holy nation. The people respond by proclaiming, "All that God has spoken, we shall do." On the 6th day of the 3rd month, which we know today as the holiday of Shavuos, where we celebrate the giving of the Torah. 7 weeks after the Exodus, 49 days, the entire nation of Israel assembles at the foot of Mount Sinai. God descends on the mountain amidst thunder, lightning, billows of smoke, and the blast of the shofar, and summons Moses to ascend. God proclaims the 10 Commandments, commanding the people of Israel to believe in God. There are 613 commandments coming all together, but the first 10, the down payment of 10 at Sinai, is what's in this week's Torah portion. Moses spends many days up on the mountain to be for 40 days and then 40 days and then 40 days altogether, 120 days. And God gives him the broader program of the Torah. And in the 10 Commandments, God commands the people of Israel to believe in God, not to worship idols or take God's name in vain, to keep the Shabbat, to honor their parents, not to murder, not to commit adultery, not to steal, not to bear false witness or covet another's property. I would say, and it will come up slightly in today's discussion, but although it's not a substantive part of today's discussion, that in many things we know in tradition that there are 248 positive commandments and 365 negatives. Some of them are clear. You should do this. You should not do this. We don't have 613 of those. There are questions as to whether one specific thing is a commandment or another specific thing is a commandment, and there's a whole field of study in Torah. And even the 10 Commandments is not agreed upon by everyone. And lahavdil, if you Google it, you see Catholics have 10 in their reading of the English. They have one way. Protestants, there's like probably 4 different ways that the Christians slice it up. So it's not as clear. Some of them are not as clear. And even the ones they brought, this is Maimonides' list. Not everybody would agree. The people cry out to Moses that the revelation is too intense for them to bear, begging him to receive the Torah from God and convey it to them. Okay. Today's Torah discussion is going to focus on the 10 Commandments and lessons from how the 10 Commandments are phrased, specifically the first commandment. What Maimonides calls the first commandment is the verse where God says, "I am God who took you out of Egypt." To most of us, in the English, that's not a commandment. It's an introduction. And indeed, there are many great authorities in Torah thought to say that's not a commandment. Maimonides and many others consider that a commandment. I am God, establishing that it's not what I think. I need you to accept that I am God. And that is mitzvah number 1. We want to look at the phraseology and some very interesting lessons that we can find in this. And I would just point out that Chabad Hasidic thought in general are things that I tell you from the Rebbe. Chabad Hasidic thought, which started in the 1700s, it didn't come along to say, there's the Torah, and now we're adding something. We got a new idea. Appendix A to the Torah. Torah's Torah. Torah's broad. It's the simple interpretation. It's the Talmudic. It's the homiletic, the Kabbalistic. But when you're looking at the Torah, you can emphasize some elements, not eliminate, but de-emphasize others. It's the question is how you take the Torah. And to me, the beauty of how the founder of Chabad, Rabbi Zalman, came along in showing a meaningful approach to the Torah was taking Torah things that everybody believes in, but putting them together and getting a general attitude to the Torah. He didn't invent anything. When he wrote his book that we call the Tanya, his book is called A Collection of Sayings. He didn't claim to innovate anything. He was just collecting what other earlier rabbis said, but he put them together in a mosaic that presented Judaism in a way that wasn't being seen that way. The Rebbe also, we're going to highlight something today from Rashi, an attitude of Rashi, which Rashi's Rashi. There's not a yeshiva in the world that doesn't accept the authority of Rashi as a Torah commentator. But there's some Rashis you could just like gloss over, and some say, look what he's saying. Stop, listen to what he's telling us. So we're going to get to one of those here, something that the Rebbe is going to make us pause and look at Rashi. And really the gist of it is, does God listen to or care about someone who isn't interested in him? I get a FedEx, and the person comes in and their badge says Goldstein. And I say, oh, are you Jewish? Yeah, my parents were. Well, if your parents were, you're Jewish. I don't believe in anything. Matter of fact, if I go to a house of worship, I go to a church. I say, you're still Jewish. I don't believe in Judaism. Did you put on tefillin? And the guy says, listen, if it's going to make you happy, you go right ahead, but I have nothing to do with this. Is there a point to me putting on tefillin? Does God care when, from my perspective, here's someone who's saying, I want nothing to do with you. So what's the point of him putting on tefillin? Is it valuable to God? Obviously, a Chabad perspective is yes. There are many people who say no, which makes sense. In the common framing of what went on in Mount Sinai is that it was a marriage between us and God. In a marriage, if God forbid one says to the other, I want nothing to do with you, then you're spurring me then to say, well, I'm going to make you a kugel, or can I have? You're saying you want nothing to do with me. You want nothing to do with me. God forbid. There's such a thing as divorce. So is it possible for someone to divorce themselves from Judaism or God? So let's get into this a little bit. We're going to come up to that more in the second half of the class. Let's start from the beginning now. Before we get to the Ten Commandments, I want to frame it a little bit. So I juggled the texts here, and I'm going to start with text 3. And I'm trying to present. I want us to understand when God spoke to Moses, the Jews, and this is 4 weeks ago in our Torah reading, the Jews were suffering in Egypt. They were suffering for centuries. Good morning. They were suffering for centuries. And now God speaks to Moses coming from a burning bush. And he says, I want you to go to Egypt and tell Pharaoh, let my people go. The Jews are suffering. It's time for them to be freed. That's what we remember. There's actually an important nuance in what God says. When God spoke to Moses, he says, you're going to take them out of Egypt. And when you take the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. God, he was on Mount Sinai. When he was the text there, the narrative says he was shepherding sheep, and he ran after a sheep, and he came to a mountain, and he saw this burning bush, and it wasn't being consumed, and a voice came out. We're on page 52. And told him, that voice, God told Moses originally, as the plan, take them out of Egypt, and you're going to come worship God in this mountain. He told him, there's a linkage. Leave Egypt, come to Mount Sinai. From the get-go, from the first introduction to get him out of Egypt. In text 4, it's also in these original narrative. It says, God tells Moses, say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I will take you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will save you from the labor. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. I will take you to me as a people, and I will be a God to you. So God is telling Moses, that it's not just about alleviating their pain. It was, I'm going to take you out, and now you're going to be mine. I will be a God to you. You will know that I am the Lord. You're going to recognize me. I'm going to love you, your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So there's a clear linkage up front that I'm taking you out of Egypt because you're mine, and I'm taking you out of Egypt to come to have a special, intimate experience with me, where you're now going to be my people. That's the way the Torah has been set up. So now, over several weeks, the narrative has been set up. So over several weeks, they get out of Egypt, and there's a whole Passover story, and the original Passover story. Then yesterday they came to the split sea. This week they come to Sinai. What's the first thing at Sinai? The first words that God says of the Ten Commandments, God spoke all the words as follows. Verse 2, which is the first thing that God says, is, I am the Lord your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall not have any other gods in my presence.
Okay, the wording on that differs from the common wording, which is before me, as opposed to in my presence.
That's not today's thing. It could be before me. What we're looking at is the linkage of, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. It makes sense. Remember, the Jews have been primed. This is over a year. Moses is telling them, you're getting out of Egypt, you're being freed from slavery, then we're going to go meet God at a mountain. God said they're going to come back to this mountain to serve me. They know that this is a continuum. So it makes perfect sense when he says, I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Okay, this is the next step. And I'm Lord your God means believe in me. As I said before, Maimonides says that's the mitzvah of belief in God. It's not a thou shalt, but it's the mitzvah. It's presenting a fact for us to accept. I'm the Lord your God. So now, before we go there, and again, I don't want to make this focused on a study of Rashi, but we're using Rashi as the conduit, the avenue through which we're getting to these lessons. Rashi, as a rule, only comments when there's something in the flow of the verses which it would be quizzical, curious to a 5-year-old, or something might elude a 5-year-old, where it's actually the 5-year-old will not pick up on a nuance here of what the simple interpretation is, because they may take it at a simpler level. Here, on the face of it, Rashi has nothing to tell us. I'm the Lord, the God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Why does he mention taking you out of the land of Egypt? Because I just came out of Egypt, and the fact is those two are together. Remember, you were coming out of Egypt to come to the mountain. I'm here. We're doing it. Rashi does comment. But what does he say? Who took you out of the land of Egypt? He says, the act of taking you out is sufficient to make you subservient to me. So I'm not just telling you that I took you out of Egypt because you should know. Remember that. You're only 7 weeks out. You've been prepared from Egypt to come to Sinai. I am emphasizing something. You were in Egypt. You were subservient in a bad way. I didn't bring you out to free you of responsibility. Now you're subservient to me. That's a good thing. Now, let's pursue that a little bit. This is from Nachmanides. I am the Lord your God, text 5. Nachmanides agrees with Maimonides that this statement constitutes a positive commandment. But what does that mean? I am the Lord was an instruction to know and to believe that there is a God and that God is our master. That means he's eternal. It means that God is the original cause who willed everything into being. It means God is a God whom he must serve. So that is establishing God. God is the master of the universe. God is the creator, and God is someone to whom we must listen, whom we must obey. And as Rashi says later on, I am the one who said at Sinai, I'm the Lord your God. You accept my kingship on yourselves, then you must now therefore now accept my decrees. So what is that? Actually, the idea of a God, as the Rebbe said, but they don't have a translation here. I thought they had something here of the Rebbe translating something here. So, yeah. I will just tell it to you from my head. The Rebbe pointed this out, saying like this, saying when the level of relationship, if I have a king, a president, a governor, whatever, I'm bound, I got a government, I'm bound to obey it. But it tells me stop at a red light, pay taxes. There are rules, but then I in my life, I have my own life. I find my own identity within that. I am an American citizen, and I'm proud to be one. But when I'm eating lunch, I'm eating lunch. Not there's no there's nothing. The law and the citizenship doesn't have a bearing on. Rashi goes what his language is, and I'm going to go back up here. His language is the act of taking you out is sufficient to make you subservient to me. Subservient means that what you do, you're surrendered to me. You have a business, you have relationships, you eat lunch, you play. Everything has meaning. Anything we go through the day, we want to know is, how would God look at this? It's not just like a king. The king, you pledge fealty, you play by the rules, but then you do things you don't think about the king all day. What God is saying is you went out in a bad way. Pharaoh totally took up all the space of your life. Here, I want you to have a life, but I want you to always remember, so what does God want of me? With this lunch, with this relationship, with this business deal, what's the right way to do it? That's point number one of what this Torah board, this Rashi tells us about this opening line of God will that God says, "I am God who took you out of Egypt." Then he goes to a second thing, which brings us to the point I mentioned before. It says, I'm going back to the text one for a second. I am the Lord your God, it says. Now, in English, your God can mean, I can be, if I am saying to, if I'm speaking in this room and you can't see who's in the room, but you're in the hallway, and I say, this is your classroom, you don't know if I'm speaking to one person or two people. Your could be singular and plural. In Hebrew, you would know exactly. In the Hebrew language, there's a lot of nuance from the words that you're saying. You can tell if whether it's masculine, feminine, singular, plural. When it says here, I am God, your God, the language is God speaking to a singular, to an individual. And there's a lot of beauty to that. God is speaking to me. God is speaking to you, to all the people there. But it's curious. And one of the things that Rashi says, we can get to text 8, go back to 8. He says, why did God use the singular you when he stated, I'm the Lord your God? By wording himself in this way, God gave Moses an opening to present a defense for the Jewish people after they committed the sin of the golden calf. This is their wedding day, God and the Jewish people. And he says up front, I am God. I want you to remember me. There's no other gods before. In 40 days from now, the Jews are going to create a golden calf and violate what he just said. God knows that. So Rashi tells us, why does God use the singular? He's giving us a way out when that tragedy is going to happen in 40 days. God gave Moses an opening to present a defense for the Jewish people when they committed the sin of the golden calf. What's the defense? This is the meaning of Moses' words to God after the golden calf. Why God should be angry at your nation? What do you mean? What did Moses mean by that? What do you mean? Why should he be angry at the nation? Because they just worship the golden calf. What he meant is, you didn't tell them you shall not have any other gods in my presence, in the plural. You only addressed me in the singular. You told me not to have another God. They're off the hook. You didn't say you all. You said me.
It seems a stretch.
It's a stretch, but it's definitely a stretch. And the fact is that they were punished.
I mean, you could say it's you because it's perfect. I mean, why couldn't you say it's you because each individual has a relationship with God?
Correct, which is what I just told you, right? But here, what is Rashi's perspective here? Rashi is taking this perspective that God up front wanted to, even though he was going to be upset what they did, and he was going to punish the Jews for the golden calf, he wanted to give them an out. You were talking to Moses. We heard you talking to Moses. You said you should have had you in the singular. You didn't use the plural. You could have said it could have been one extra letter. It should have, it says Elokecha, it should Elokechem. It'll be all of you. You see, clearly you were talking to him. You were talking to us. How were we supposed to know? Now, is that a stretch? I'm with you. But God gave them this stretch, which isn't, it was more a plausible deniability than a real out. And one of the great commentaries on Rashi mentions here, in text 9, the reason why Rashi concluded with his explanation of the use of the singular you is as follows. Why does Rashi get into this thing of the singular you? He was explaining where the juxtaposition of Egypt, why does God remind them that they were taken out of Egypt? So he says he wants them to be subservient. What is he getting into this for? He says the entire statement of I am the Lord your God came to counter the thought that there may be multiple authorities. There was a polytheistic world. And he says, I am the Lord your God. I alone am the Lord your God, and there should be no other gods before me. Clearly, God is trying to get them away from polytheism. So why did the verse use the singular you? This could lead to the mistaken notion that multiple voices the people were hearing were indeed multiple authorities. Each of them was addressing a different person. They could have said, each one of us heard from a different God. There's a few million of us. Each of us, there are a couple million gods. It's a polytheistic universe. Why would God, Rashi is bothered. Why do you use the singular? It's one God speaking to everyone. Why would you create something where it's singular, where people could say, God spoke to you this way also, because maybe it's different gods. Why should you think it's one God who's speaking to each of us individually? Hence, it would have been better, in other words, if the program is, and the object is to take the Jews away from polytheism and focus them on monotheism, it would have been better for the Torah to use the Hebrew word. It's a plural you over here. Why the Torah opens up potential for a problem? To answer this question, that's why Rashi came along with his stretch. Says Rashi explains that the singular you was designed to give Moses an opening to defend the Jewish people. That the point is that, so God at Mount Sinai, at this once in a lifetime, literally a once in a history event where God is speaking to the Jewish people, and he's saying, it's me and you, and we love each other, and here's the Torah, and it's going to go, you go forward in history with this. He says something which could open the door to misunderstanding of monotheism. When he's trying to combat polytheism, he's trying to establish monotheism, he says you in the singular, which could lead them to think, oh, maybe we each got we're spoken to by a different God. He's willing to take, God is willing to take that risk, Rashi says, in order to give the Jews some level of plausible deniability when they do something wrong pretty soon, which is the golden calf, to say, oh, you meant all of us? Which, I got it, but that's Rashi's position.
I don't understand why the singular you, to me, says that each individual has a relationship with God.
That's what I mentioned in the beginning. It's the way I would talk to people. I totally do. But let's try and dial it back, because it's just a you. And one of the things that Rashi brings, and I didn't bring it here, I skipped that in general, but in text 7, there's one of the things that Medrash says, that they heard voices from different directions. Now, that could have been, so you think there are multiple gods. Or thinking, you said, God spoke to me individually. Well, God spoke to me individually. Or God spoke to me individually. Maybe it was different gods. Now, from this point in history, we say, no, there's a beauty because it's our personal thing. But the people standing there say, why do you, if he's talking to all of us, why do you use individual? Why do you use singular? Maybe it was different gods speaking to him. I could see that then. We're coming from a perspective of monotheism and all of that. So God was clearly just one God speaking to a multiplicity of people and using the singular. It's beautiful. You mean it's my Torah and Rhonda has her Torah. I love that, and I tell it to people. But back then, when they're living in a polytheistic universe, and each one's saying, you heard this voice talking to you in the singular? Maybe there's a bunch of gods. That's what everyone else says. And as Rashi says, Rashi is a master of the scripture, and this commentary, who was also a great rabbi and a commentary on the Rashi, saying Rashi is saying that God took a possibly counterproductive step in opening himself up to this misunderstanding of multiple gods in order to help out the Jews at a time when they're repudiating him, not just to help out the Jews. They're going through an event saying, whatever God, we're serving this golden calf. And still in there, God wants to give them an excuse. Think about it in a marriage. God forbid, one person is not loyal to the other. You're not giving the person an excuse. You're giving them a whack. Here God is protecting us in our disloyalty. So, in that sense, there are different ways of framing our relationship with God. Marriage is intimate, and marriage is passionate, and marriage is connection. It's definitely seen as a model of deep connection between two different people or two different beings. But in a way, sometimes you have to use the parent-child model, because parent-child model, Torah allows for divorce. It's one of the, if it's a situation like that, the Torah, it's one of the 613 mitzvahs. Sometimes there's no other way. But you never divorce a child. You disagree with a child. A person can even disinherit a child, but a child's a child. And ultimately, even beneath the upset with a child, we love our children. The Baal Shem Tov said, the founder of Chabad said, the founder of Hasidic movement said, God loves every Jew like parents love their only child born to them in their old age, and even more. And when a child is rebellious, when a child is disrespectful to parents, then that's horrible and it's infuriating, and we need tough love. But at the end of the day, we want to be able to take care of our children, and we never are going to let them go. We have to be, sometimes you have to do tough love. If we say, I don't want to give God forbid for me, but the person says, I don't want to give my kid any money because they're misusing and abusing themselves, sometimes have to do that. But then, offline, you want to make sure they have somewhere to sleep. You want to make sure that they're taken care of because it's a kid.
Given that interpretation.
Yeah.
Why should Moses have had to argue with God against destroying the people?
That's a really good question. But even there, it's life. Life is a drama and it's a journey, and we have to take our positions. If you look at and this was something that it was public. God told Moses, I'm going to destroy them. And Moses didn't argue originally because he's right. It's God, and they repudiated him. And then God says, now leave me alone, and because I'm going to destroy them. What do you mean leave alone? He didn't say anything. What do you mean leave me alone? God was cueing him to argue. So part of the what had to play out over here, what the people needed to see then, what we need to see through history, for posterity, is that Moses, there is accountability. Did something wrong, God says, that's no good. And Jewish leadership has to say, you know something? My job is to protect the Jewish people. Please don't do that. So there's this, I don't want to say good cop, bad cop, but just the idea of God saying, this is horrible, and therefore we deserve to start all over again with another people, they needed to hear that. But they also needed to see that Moses stands up and protects them. So they know they've really stepped on a third rail, but they know that because they have great leadership and because they're God's children, they're going to get another chance. But they shouldn't be cavalier about it. So I can do whatever I want. God will always love me. We'll take this to text 11. This is from the Rebbe, page 58. Rashi's conclusion. Why did God use the singular you? And he said he did that because to give Moses an opening to present a defense for the Jewish people after they committed the sin of the golden calf. Contains a very powerful lesson about how deeply God loves every Jew. We are talking about Jews there at the time of the golden calf. They weren't just lacking in their absolute commitment to divine service. These were people who had gone all the way to idolatry, the opposite of the mitzvah of I am Lord your God. And so they really were spitting God in the face 40 days after they got the Ten Commandments. And yet, for such people, and for the Jews of subsequent generations, God used the singular you, even though there was a big downside to it, at Mount Sinai to enable Moses to present a defense for them. God is saying that even in this specific case, I'm never going to let you go because you're my children. And even if you're repudiating me, I still want a connection with you. Even if you stand here and say, I don't believe in God, I don't want to be Jewish, I don't care about being Jewish. If I can get you to put on tefillin, God wants to hear from you. And here's how the founder of Chabad put it in his book called Tanya. He said, we must draw close with strong bonds of love, even people who are distant from God's Torah and divine service. In this chapter 32, in what we call the Tanya, Rabbi Zalman brings some Talmudic quotes, which people could use to say, if someone violates God's Torah, we should distance them. If someone is, if say you're in a family, and one of the children is being really disrespectful to mom and dad, the other siblings might say, we want nothing to do with you. We're loyal to mom and dad. I could see that. So there are Talmudic quotes that would present the same way. Say someone is saying, I don't really care about Jewish, or I'm not Jewish, or whatever it is, or they're rejecting their heritage and rejecting God. Maybe a loyal child, a loyal Jew should say, I want nothing to do with you. Rabbi Zalman brings those quotes and he gives them the context. That even if people have nothing, they're doing no good. Even such people, those such people are simply classified simply as creatures. What Rabbi Zalman says, it's not all here. There's a quote that about Aaron, Moses' brother Aaron. And the quote of the Talmud is, be of the students of Aaron, loved peace, pursued peace, loved creatures, and brought them close to Torah. That's the Talmudic quote. And Rabbi Zalman brings it here. He says, what is the rabbi of the Mishnah there saying? His name was Hillel. He said, even though it says, be the love peace and pursue peace, loves creatures. Why not loves human beings, loves other Jews, whatever. He's saying creatures, such people whose their only claim to substance is that they're alive. They're God because they're created by God. We can't find any good in them. Even though such people are classified simply as creatures, owing to the fact that their status as God's creatures is their sole virtue. We can't find anything good. There's no redeeming, to our eyes, there's no redeeming value, redeeming factor. These two, they too must be brought closer with love. That's what the Talmud is saying over there. So Rabbi Zalman counters, say, okay, there is the idea of really being disgusted by your sibling who's disrespectful to a parent. Absolutely. But that has to live side by side with the fact that this is your sibling and you love your siblings. And that same Talmud that says that we should feel revolted that someone is being disrespectful to God. Yes, but that same Talmud says that we should look at creatures, people whose only value is existing, and envelop them with love. And through that, bring them closer to Torah. That's what the Talmud says. So Rabbi Zalman, in that chapter 32, he's bringing together two what may seem to be contradictory, definitely competing values in the Talmud. You know, many years ago, many years ago, someone here from Basking Ridge, they don't live here anymore. They were sitting shiva. Lost a sibling, and they were older than me, probably a few decades older than me, and they were sitting shiva they have a place in Manhattan. So they were sitting shiva in Manhattan. So I went into Manhattan to see them. There's a building. I'm not a Manhattan guy, but I found the building. I went up to the apartment. I knocked on the door. I opened the door. They didn't know I was coming, and the man who was sitting shiva was putting. He had a buttered bagel in his hand, and he was in the middle of putting chopped liver on it. And as I walked into the room, his sister saw me, and she slapped down his hand. As she saw me, she said, and all of a sudden, I'm walking in. I meet eyes, and all of a sudden, there's a tumult because he's saying, "What are you doing?" You know, it was, and it took me a few seconds. I realized what she did. She didn't want to do that in front of. When I realized what it was, I said, "Don't mind me. I'm just here to see you because of your loss." The bagel was put to the side. We had a conversation. I left. As I was driving in the Lincoln Tunnel, I was thinking, what took up all the space in my mind. It was their discomfort that I walked in. He's trying to eat. She thinks, oh, the rabbi's here. You can't eat that in front of him. She slaps down his hand. He's saying, what are you doing to me? I made a tumult in their house. I didn't feel comfortable about that. But I was thinking, was I bothered that here's a Jew who's no less a Jew than I, who has mitzvahs no less than I, who's about to eat meat and milk? What you don't do? And the answer was, I have to be honest with myself, I'm so used to it. That's not what, it wasn't that offended me and I overrode that offense to feel, but I just want to, I want you to feel comfortable. It didn't strike me. Rabbi Zalman is presenting a case here is that if someone comes in here and they say, I converted to Catholicism, I'm wearing 16 crucifixes, and I hate Jews, but my mother was Jewish, it should bother me. And I should override it and say, would you like to come to my house Friday night? Can we put on tefillin? No matter what you say, I still see you as a Jew. But if here's a Jew saying, I'm repudiating my Judaism, it should bother me. And then I should override it and embrace them. That's the case that Rabbi Zalman is putting out there. And here, so that's what he's saying. Perhaps we'll eventually be successful in drawing them closer to the Torah and divine service. Even if we fail, we've still earned the merit of the mitzvah of brotherly love. Let's say this guy with the 16 crucifixes who's now going to, God forbid, he's going to church every week. Let's say I didn't get into Prontville. I didn't change his mind. And he's going about his business. But I sat down with him and I said, can I give you a coffee? We're brothers. Or brothers and sisters. That itself is a mitzvah too. For me to feel close to other Jews is also a mitzvah. And that's what Rabbi Zalman was putting down there. He said, you cannot decontextualize one thing which says, I'm supposed to be upset about a Jew being disrespectful to God. That's true. But it also says you have to love that person. It doesn't, there's nothing that says that frees you of the mitzvah of loving. You're going to have to be able to live with the both, reconcile the both. That it's a sibling who you care about, who you love, whose behavior in disrespect for your parents bothers you. That's totally legit. But you're not going to divorce. There's somehow, you do care about them. And that's what this Rashi is bringing to us. Of what is it that God did at the very outset of the Ten Commandments? Presented it in a way where there's two lessons up front. First of all, is that we are surrendered to God. Every aspect of our life, we want to figure out where does God want us to be. But then the singular tells us that God was willing to risk a misunderstanding only to help us, his children, in a time when we are being rebellious. So let's look at the key points. The Ten Commandments open with the commandment to believe in God who took us out of Egypt. Number 2, the Jewish people's enslavement in Egypt served as a prelude to receiving the Torah. Number 3, moreover, the entire purpose of the liberation from Egypt was to become his servants, a new identity. And finally, number 4, God introduced himself as the one who took us out of Egypt to dispel any misconceptions of polytheism, I think. Number 5, yet, yes, God used a singular you to provide defense, or is yet, it should be, yet God provided the singular you to provide defense for the Jewish people who would later sin with the golden calf. Number 6, God did this because he loves his children, even when they fail. And finally, number 7, when we internalize this message of unconditional love, it empowers us to reciprocate and align ourselves with God's will. So, I don't know if there are any questions, but so have a great week.
Thank
See
you,
you next
Rabbi.
video.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah.